Hey! So polytranslator, there's this neat little word for space. And it's used as a suffix and all sorts of different things. Yeah. Two of them are antinomies, and they're antinomies of existential existence, whether that be a psychophysical persona non grata, Bob Suleri, made out of flesh and blood, or a transcendent being who's not in a meat suit anymore, but lives at the other end of the spectrum. Yeah, these neat little words are called dukkha and sukha. Yeah, dukkha, typically translated as pain and hell, and the other word sukha, ultimate bliss, not pleasure, but ultimate bliss. It's actually been used sometimes in conjunction with the word pleasure. And these are, of course, the antinomies. Yeah, the wheel of samsara. You're at the top, and now you're at the bottom, and the whole cycle repeats itself endlessly. And this, of course, is where we get the word for hell. But it literally means transmigration, i.e. samsara, which literally means to go round and round. Yeah? Most people have actually heard that word in English before. That's samsara. Well, what does that really mean, the antinomies of becoming? Space. There's these different ideas of space, and I've got like 1,000 videos, at least it feels like, demonstrating the supercell over here, or the ferrocell. Yeah. There are two spaces that are seen and a third that goes unseen, which is right at the middle of a magnet. Right at the very middle. I don't have any magnets right here in front of me, but I got tons of magnets. Yeah. As you've seen in the ferrocell or supercell videos, and once again I've got like 1,000 of them uploaded, you actually see this big hole on the north pole of the magnet. And you flip it over and you see this big hole, and a lot of people say, oh, it looks like a black hole. Yeah, those would be the antinomies, just like dukkha and sukha, the north pole and the south pole of the magnet. They're antinomies. And of course, a magnet ultimately doesn't have poles. It has the inverse of counter space. And counter space, I know, is a crazy word. It's kind of weird. There are a few different words that I could use, but it doesn't really matter what words I use. And nature, of course, certainly doesn't care. But there's a third hole that nobody sees, and it's right at the center of the magnet, where no magnetism exists. And it's the rest point. And radiating out from that, which radiating inwards, actually, you have the plane of inertia. The plane of inertia exists at the lowest pressure point between the magnetic and the dielectric, respectively the conjugate geometry of the universe, i.e. the torus and the hyperboloid. The superimposition of both, of course, makes up a sphere. Interestingly enough, yeah? So let's actually get to defining space, but let's talk about what Nikola Tesla said space was. And I've said this many times. The only time Nikola Tesla comes close to foaming at the mouth in rage is against the ideas of reifying space vis-a-vis relativity. I know we all grew up with Star Trek, Star Wars, and countless science fiction movies talk about bending space and time. Well, space has no properties. It'd be like talking about bending unicorn farts, or bending something that doesn't exist except as something strange in the back of our mind from childhood thinking about a unicorn. And time is only a measure. Every ancient culture said time is the number 4. There's a reason for that, and I can explain it. It'd take me like 20 minutes to explain it. It's also, too, the only number that doesn't exist in the first 5 digits of the Fibonacci sequence, which are 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. 4 is the only number missing. Time is a measure. You can't bend time any easier than you could bend leprechaun hairs. You can't bend space because it has no properties. It has attributes, yeah? But it doesn't have any properties. Space is exactly like a shadow, by the way. A shadow is not a thing. Shadow is an absence of a thing. Anyway, let's quote Nikola Tesla here. Contrary to the teachings of relativity, space cannot be curved for the simple reason that space has no properties. To say that in the presence of large bodies, this space becomes curved is stating that something can act upon nothing. I, for one, refuse to subscribe to such a ridiculous view. The supposed curvature of space is entirely impossible. All literature on this topic is futile and destined to oblivion. That's direct quotes from Nikola Tesla. Here's mine. What is space? Space is an anti-field, which is exactly what space is. Yeah. Field, of course, is an ether perturbation modality, just like ice, water, and steam are different modalities of water, right? Or simply ether rarefaction, yeah, which is what space is, ether rarefaction. And what is space? Now, I know this is not a perfect torus, this fake golden apple here, but space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. The actual volume of this apple or of a torus is that thing that we call space. Now we think a shadow is a thing, and a shadow is a noun in the dictionary, and so is space, but a shadow is not a thing. It's an absence of a thing, yeah? Space is not a thing either. It's the absence of something. And what it is the negative image of infinity, i.e. of inertia, i.e. of the ether. There's a reason why all bodies in space. We think things are hanging in space, like space is a wall. You know, I got stuff nailed up on the wall. And the wall would, of course, be the analogy of space. They're mutually accelerating towards one another. Now, if there's only two things in the universe, for example, it's like, well, we got the space between these two objects. They're mutually accelerating, never towards each other, or rather towards a null pressure point between both. And, of course, we have, ultimately, and we imagine a torus, where this is at one end of the torus, this is the other end of the torus, then we have a shrinking, vanishing to zero torus. Nature abhors a vacuum. Space is the vacuum of that energy or inertia. However, there is a fundamental equation that's tattooed right here on the inside of my wrist that actually explains why energy is lost of the ether, in the ether, by the ether, and then of course we have manifestation. We have light, and of course super high energy light is matter. Matter accumulates. If you get enough matter, it attains to point source singularity, and then dielectricity overthrows its ability to stay within the visible universe, and you have something supermassive with no magnitude. And ignorant human beings call it a black hole. And that's what a black hole is. Really, really simple, isn't it? Because that's exactly what it is. So, what is space? It's an anti-field. Space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, or more simply, the negative image of energy or inertia, as of course meant ether homeostasis. All matter mutually accelerates, of course, towards the lowest null pressure point, and as such erases space, not literally, but conventionally, erases space and releases ether rarefaction torsion. From a standpoint of metaphysics, and this is the easiest way to understand it for most people, since they don't think about field theory from dawn to dusk like people like me do, it's easy to declare space as an ether shadow. That's exactly what space is an ether shadow. For neither space nor a shadow or a thing in themselves, rather the absence of a thing. Case being of space, absence of the ether. Case of a shadow being the absence of light. These are not things in themselves. They have no essa or essence. You know? They're not principles. These are the absence of principles. Two forms, of course, are assumed of types. They're not forms literally. I don't mean that literally. There are two assumed principles of space. Conventional space, as human beings ideate it, and of course, that which is empty of all potential, like the axle pin or the nave of a wheel, the center of a galaxy, a black hole, or the hole at the center of a ferrocell image. You know, I got 1,000 videos on the ferrocell. Yeah. One of them is literal impotency of energy, and the other is the portal towards and of all energy. Looking down on a hyperboloid, where it's like in the case of, which is what we're looking at, on the case of looking at North Pole or South Pole of a magnet, underneath the supercell we see this space. It's like we see this brilliant light display, a holographic, and we're looking top down on a torus, of course, just like this fake apple here. And you see that little hole right down there in the top of the ferrocell? Yeah? That space, well, that's not space. That's where all potential exists. All energy and everything comes out of some portal, including from human beings, right? Also to enter in there, and then come out from there. So as ye leaveth, so shall ye return. I think there's an old passage from Advaita Vedanta and also to the Upanishads. So two forces, two forms of space, not literal forms, are assumed, you know, conventional and absolute. But like the black hole in this, the center of a ferrocell image. So we're talking about the measures between masses regarding space. And this, of course, is time. The measure of the distance between these masses, we have time, but time doesn't exist. Time actually has less existence than space does. Space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, but there's no such thing as bending space or the curvature of space. These assumed curvatures of space, in the case of people talk about, oh, you know, it was observed during a solar eclipse that light was bent around the sun. This shows that there is space curvature. No, what it does show is that light is a coaxial circuit whose main component is dielectricity, and it actually, the dielectric, as two masses are dielectric, it's no different than static cling, shows that light is actually bent by the incredibly enormous dielectric acceleration or assumed gravity, dielectric acceleration are one and the same thing, expressed in different ways verbally. That light, of course, is bent relational to that supermass, i.e. the sun. In the case of the solar eclipse, relativity was confirmed back during the solar eclipse, where light from a star that was technically behind the sun was warped by the sun's gravity. In the case of warped space-time. Well, that's not the case at all. What was warped was what was warped was the light, but the light was warped from the fact that gravity and that light are both dielectric and they're mutually accelerative. So this is where we have correct observations and correct descriptions, but completely incorrect explanations. So we have two different types of space, but they're not two different types. They're just misconstrued with one another. A false space which has all potential, like the center of a galaxy or a black hole, and the conventional space that human beings think of as existing between masses and magnitudes. So this once again corresponds to the hole on either side of a magnet or a ferrocell, or to the hole at the center of a galaxy. But space is not a thing. Space, or chaos, in the Greek word chaos, or in the Pali word dacha, space. We have antinomies of space as manifest, and we have the space as the magnitude, as the, this negative image of infinity. In the case of infinity, we're referring to the absolute. Not infinity of becoming, bhava nubhava, but the infinity of absence. And this, of course, we're talking about the two different darknesses. There's the darkness of matter, i.e. the shadow that's cast from mass and magnitude, which is ultimately evil and ultimately clung to. And then there's the darkness of that which is the greatest potential. And it's only dark because it is unmanifest. It is pure potential that doesn't exist in the world of phenomena. It doesn't partake of Cartesian value with an x, y, z coordinate. A black hole, it has no mass within this universe, but because it has attained a point source singularity, it vanishes from this universe. That is another space in the universe. So how do we typify, space from a black hole? Well, we can see its influence upon other things. Combined with the fact that supermassive black holes actually emit out trillions and trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen, and this phenomenon is called galactic jets, or also too called astrophysical jets. But space, in simple, is just an anti-field, and what space is an ether shadow. Materialists and atomists, of course, have reified space as a thing. Curved space-time, we bet space-time. Star Trek, Star Wars, God knows how many science fiction. They all say they love using that nonsense from relativity. Curved space-time, we bent space-time and traveled to the distant galaxy. We engaged the, what was that crazy movie? They had like this gravity drive in the back of the starship, and it curved space-time. It created a tear in space-time. We traveled through it. It makes for great science fiction movies, but it makes Mother Nature out to be a buffoon. Nature doesn't work that way. And there's a fundamental understanding that I cannot tell you by flapping my lips. You actually have to realize it yourself. Since magnetism is the dielectric field, which manifests the toroidal geometry, and that's what magnetism is geometry is toroidal, which manifests that toroidal increasing force and motion vector of this torus of the three-dimensional force vector that is magnetism, i.e. centrifugal divergence. Where do you think that loss of energy goes? The impotency or loss of energy manifests as that thing we call space, but that space is not a thing itself. That is why it is an ether shadow, and as I've called it, an ether shadow. That would be the volume inside this oblate torus here, this fake apple. That's not a perfect torus, but it is a torus. And there's the volume inside this torus, the meat of the apple, if you will. Of course, in the case of space, there is no meat, there's nothing. There is not a total loss of energy, but there is a loss of energy or inertia that manifests magnetism. Magnetism is that expanding torus. Yes. The loss of that energy manifests as space. The loss of energy of the dielectric of counter space, and this is where counter space does come logical, manifests as space. We could say subspace, we could say zero-point energy, we could say counter space. Who cares? Zero-point energy, who cares? We could just call it what it really is, ether homeostasis. But ether homeostasis has an extrinsic attribute, which is tattooed right here. My discovery on the inside of my right wrist. This little neat little equation here, which actually explains the entire universe. And it would take me hours and hours and hours and hours to explain it. It's right there, tattooed right there. My discovery. Did I mention it was my discovery? Actually, it wasn't mine. I found it hidden in Plato's Republic 509d to 511. And Plato didn't discover it. The Pythagoreans and who knows before them discovered it. So it's super, super, super ancient. I just rediscovered it. But it's so divinely simple. It makes explaining everything in the universe so absolutely simple beyond belief that it is awful. Not as one word, like awful, like that's awful. There's an old word that's not used anymore, meaning awful, meaning like you've just seen the most amazing thing that anybody could ever possibly see, and it just like washes over you and through you and in you. It makes it really, really simple. Everything becomes unified in a single simplistic system. Very, very simple. Anyway, that is what space is. But maybe you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla. You think you can bend space and time. Maybe you are of the opinion or the false belief, and it is a belief, it's a belief system. Space can be bent. It's like, no, it can't be, because space is not a thing. To think space is a thing is like thinking a shadow is a thing. And most of us have within our heads that a shadow is a thing. Shadow! Oh, look at that shadow. Yeah, I see it, but a shadow is not a thing. A shadow is an absence of something. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Oh, I miss my girlfriend. Not meaning me, I don't have a girlfriend. Oh, I miss my girlfriend. Oh, there's like a hole in my heart. There's an empty space in my heart. I miss my girlfriend. I'm just using this analogously, right? Oh, you got a space in your heart. Yeah, I miss her. Yeah, that's a feeling. But that feeling is not a thing at all, in any way, shape, or form, real or unreal. It's a vacuity. It's an ether shadow. You stand in a shadow, you feel cold, right? You're like, oh, a shadow is a thing. I stand in it, I get cold. You're only saying you get cold, and you are getting cold, as a basis of comparison between that and standing in the light. Of course you feel colder in a shadow, because there's no light present. It's being blocked by matter. But that's why human beings think. A shadow has attributes. You feel cold in a shadow, right? You can't see things in a shadow. This is the reason why relativity and atomists and modern-day physicists have reified space. Well, space does stuff. No, it has attributes, but it doesn't have any properties. Space has attributes exactly like a shadow does, but space is not a thing at all. Neither is a shadow. I hope I cleared that up just a little bit. Yeah. It's thundering and lightning outside. I love lightning, except when the power goes out. But I got that solved too. Got a power supply. Have a lovely weekend. Lux e Veritas. I'll never forget my little... There's a nice lady. She hand-sewed this Nikola Tesla doll. People like come over and it's like, what's that on your doll? You got dolls? Like, oh, there's a nice lady made this for me. It's a really good likeness. Yeah. There we go. Showed you my Tesla doll. I didn't ask for it, but it's really cute. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. If you like these videos, any donation is always warmly welcome. Or you can tell me how much you hated it. Okay? Thank you.